Who fixed it? Charlotte Hayes asked quietly. No one answered. The massive operations center that had been buzzing with panic just minutes earlier now sat in complete silence. Screens glowed across the room. Executives stared. Senior engineers exchanged confused looks. Somewhere in the back, a coffee cup slipped from someone's hand and hit the carpet with a soft thud. But nobody seemed to notice, because every eye in the room was fixed on one man. A janitor. A single father. A man most of them had walked past every day without learning his name. Ethan Walker stood beside a maintenance cart, one hand resting lightly on the handle. His blue work shirt was slightly wrinkled. His employee badge hung crooked from a worn lanyard. He didn't look like someone who had just saved $100 million. He didn't look like someone who had prevented the biggest disaster in company history. Yet the evidence was glowing on every monitor in the building. The system was back online. Production lines were moving again. International clients had stopped canceling emergency calls. The nightmare that had threatened to wipe out months of revenue had vanished in less than 10 minutes. Charlotte swallowed slowly. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She had spent years building Hayes Dynamics into one of America's fastest-growing technology companies. She had hired the best consultants, the brightest engineers, the most respected executives in the industry. Yet when everything fell apart, when every expert in the room ran out of answers, the person who saved them had been the man cleaning their floors. Ethan didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply reached for a folded microfiber cloth and wiped a small coffee stain from the edge of a workstation. The gesture felt almost unreal. One of the vice presidents blinked repeatedly, as if trying to wake from a dream. That's him, he whispered. The janitor? Nobody replied, because they all knew the answer. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. Something about Ethan bothered her. Not because he had fixed the problem, because of the way he had done it. There had been no hesitation, no guessing, no searching. He had walked into the chaos with the calm confidence of someone who already knew the solution, like a pilot recognizing a familiar runway, like a teacher reviewing a lesson he had written himself. And that realization sent a chill through her. Who was he really? Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, evening sunlight painted the city skyline in shades of gold and amber. Inside, the room remained frozen, quiet, waiting. Ethan finally looked up. For the first time, his eyes met Charlotte's across the operations center. There was no arrogance there, no triumph, only a quiet dignity that somehow made the silence even heavier. Then he nodded politely and returned to his cart, as if saving $100 million was just another task on a Tuesday afternoon. 48 hours earlier, nobody in Hayes Dynamics would have believed such a thing was possible. 48 hours earlier, Ethan Walker had been invisible. 48 hours earlier, the city had not yet begun to panic, and Ethan Walker was exactly what everyone believed him to be. A janitor. Nothing more. At 5:30 every morning, while most of Hayes Dynamics still slept behind dark apartment windows and quiet suburban streets, Ethan's alarm clock chimed softly from the nightstand beside his bed. He never hit snooze. He never complained. He simply sat up, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and began another day. The small two-bedroom house he rented sat on a quiet street just outside Columbus, Ohio. It was not much to look at. The paint on the porch railings needed attention. The mailbox leaned slightly to one side. But inside it felt warm, safe, lived in. Ethan moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast before his daughter woke up. Pancakes on Saturdays. Oatmeal during the week. Today was oatmeal. He stirred cinnamon into the pot, while sunlight slowly crept through the blinds. A few moments later, 10-year-old Lily Walker appeared in the doorway wearing oversized socks and carrying a math workbook against her chest. Morning, Dad. Ethan smiled immediately. Morning, kiddo. Lily climbed onto a stool and opened the workbook. I think I figured out the last problem. Ethan glanced at the page and chuckled softly. I think you figured it out before your teacher did. Lily grinned. Their mornings were simple. No luxury vacations. No expensive cars. No grand promises. Just small conversations and shared routines that made difficult years feel a little lighter. After breakfast, Ethan drove her to school in a 12-year-old pickup truck that rattled slightly whenever it stopped at red lights. As Lily stepped onto the sidewalk, she turned back and waved. Do not work too hard today. Ethan laughed. You too. Then she disappeared through the front doors with a crowd of students. For a moment, Ethan sat quietly behind the steering wheel, watching, smiling. The smile faded only after the doors closed behind her. Like many people who carried old grief, he had learned how to place it carefully where others could not see it. By 7 o'clock, he was at Hayes Dynamics. The headquarters tower rose 22 stories above downtown Columbus, its glass exterior reflecting the morning sky. Employees streamed through the revolving doors carrying laptops and coffee cups. Most never noticed Ethan. They nodded politely when necessary. Sometimes they did not look up at all. Ethan did not seem bothered. He pushed his maintenance cart through polished hallways and quiet conference rooms with the calm patience of someone who expected nothing from the world except another honest day of work. Yet every now and then, strange things happened. A software engineer would stare at a frozen screen for 20 minutes before Ethan casually pointed toward a hidden setting that solved the problem. A network technician would mention an issue in passing, only to find a handwritten suggestion left beside the workstation later that afternoon. Nobody paid much attention. They assumed he was lucky, helpful, observant. Nobody imagined there might be another explanation. Because nobody ever expects genius to arrive carrying cleaning supplies. Most people never noticed the pattern. That was the strange thing about Ethan Walker. The clues were always there, scattered quietly through the building like puzzle pieces nobody bothered to collect. On the 32nd floor, software developer Nathan Brooks spent nearly an hour struggling with a stubborn automation error. He restarted his workstation twice. He checked the documentation. He even called a colleague in Seattle. Nothing worked. Frustrated, he pushed back from his desk and muttered to himself. Ethan happened to be emptying a recycling bin nearby. Did the deployment package update after the security patch? Ethan asked casually. Nathan looked up. What? Ethan shrugged lightly. Sometimes the new patch changes the dependency order. Nathan blinked. How would you know that? Ethan smiled politely. Just a guess. 10 minutes later, Nathan checked the dependency chain. Ethan was right. The issue disappeared immediately. Similar moments happened all over the company. Small, easy to dismiss, easy to forget, yet they continued appearing. During lunch one afternoon, two network engineers argued over a recurring server bottleneck that had been slowing response times for weeks. They filled a whiteboard with diagrams. They debated possible causes. They ordered additional diagnostics. The next morning, someone discovered a neatly written note sitting beside the board. It contained only 3 sentences and a simple recommendation. The engineers followed the suggestion out of curiosity. The bottleneck vanished before noon. Nobody knew who left the note. Ethan never volunteered an explanation. He preferred silence. Silence was easier. Silence did not invite questions. Yet there were moments when even silence could not completely hide who he was. One rainy afternoon, Ethan was cleaning a conference room after a board meeting. Most executives had already left. The room smelled faintly of coffee and expensive cologne. Papers remained scattered across the polished table. As he gathered empty cups, his eyes landed on a technical presentation left open on a screen. It displayed a complex system architecture diagram. Ethan paused for less than 5 seconds. Then he quietly picked up a dry erase marker. He added a single circle around one component and wrote 6 words beneath it. Single point of failure. Nothing else. The next morning, senior architects spent 3 hours reviewing the diagram. Eventually, they reached the same conclusion. The circled component represented a vulnerability nobody had noticed. A vulnerability that could eventually cripple an entire production environment. When Charlotte Hayes heard about the discovery, she frowned. Who identified it? Nobody knew. The question lingered unanswered. Charlotte moved on. She had bigger problems to solve. Investors. Expansion plans. A major artificial intelligence integration scheduled for launch later that week. Yet something about the incident stayed with her. Not enough to investigate. Not yet. Meanwhile, Ethan continued moving quietly through the building. He repaired broken chairs, refilled paper dispensers, vacuumed hallways after everyone else had gone home. To most employees, he remained part of the background. Reliable, invisible, ordinary. But beneath that ordinary exterior lived a mind that noticed everything. Every system alert, every technical conversation, every overlooked detail. And 2 days before the crisis that would shake Hayes Dynamics, Ethan noticed something nobody else did. A tiny anomaly hidden deep inside a system report. Most people would have ignored it. Most people never would have seen it at all. Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment. Then a shadow of concern crossed his face. For the first time in years, he had a feeling that something much bigger was coming. The anomaly appeared on a Tuesday evening just after 7 o'clock. Most employees had already gone home. The upper floors of Hayes Dynamics glowed softly against the darkening Ohio sky, while automated cleaning machines hummed through empty hallways. Ethan Walker was finishing his usual route when he noticed a forgotten monitor still active inside a conference room. Normally, he would have powered it down and moved on. Instead, something on the screen caught his attention. A system health report scrolled slowly across the display. Thousands of entries. Thousands of numbers. To most people, it would have looked like meaningless noise. Ethan stepped closer. His eyes narrowed. There it was again. A tiny synchronization delay hidden inside the artificial intelligence production environment. Less than 0.1%. Small enough to avoid triggering alerts. Small enough to escape routine audits. But not small enough to escape him. Ethan studied the data for several seconds. The concern on his face deepened. He knew exactly what it meant. Alone, the issue was harmless. Combined with the scheduled rollout planned for Thursday morning, it could become catastrophic. The artificial intelligence platform sat at the center of Hayes Dynamics' newest expansion project. Clients across North America were preparing to integrate the technology into manufacturing networks, logistics systems, and predictive analytics platforms. Millions of dollars depended on a flawless launch. Ethan quietly copied several report numbers onto a notepad. The next morning, he arrived early and reviewed additional diagnostics from public dashboards available throughout the building. The pattern remained. Worse, it appeared to be spreading. By lunchtime, he had confirmed his suspicion. A hidden conflict existed deep within the architecture. If enough processing demand hit the system simultaneously, entire sections could fail in sequence. The thought troubled him. During a brief break, Ethan walked to the engineering department. Rows of monitors displayed project schedules and deployment timelines. Engineers moved between meetings carrying tablets and coffee cups. Ethan approached a senior systems manager named Victor Reynolds. "Excuse me," Ethan said politely. Victor barely looked up. "Yeah." Ethan handed him a small sheet of paper. "You may want to check these synchronization logs before Thursday." Victor glanced at the paper, then at Ethan, then back at the paper. "You found this. I noticed something unusual." Victor gave a short laugh. "You noticed something unusual." Several nearby employees looked over. One smiled. Another shook his head. Victor handed the paper back. "Thanks, Ethan, but we have an entire engineering division handling this project." Ethan remained calm. "I understand. Then trust us to do our jobs." Ethan nodded once. "Of course." He turned and walked away without another word. Behind him, quiet chuckles spread through the department. Nobody meant to be cruel. Most simply could not imagine a janitor understanding systems that teams of specialists had spent years building. By late afternoon, Charlotte Hayes arrived from Chicago after a series of investor meetings. Her schedule was packed. The launch remained her top priority. During a briefing, Victor casually mentioned the encounter. The room laughed politely. Charlotte smiled faintly. "Our janitor is reviewing architecture now." Victor shrugged. "Apparently." Charlotte shook her head and returned to the presentation. The conversation lasted less than 20 seconds. Yet as the meeting continued, Ethan's warning sat forgotten inside a recycling bin. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the city. Inside the company, executives celebrated final preparations for the biggest launch in Hayes Dynamics history. Nobody realized they were less than 48 hours away from a crisis that would bring the entire building to a standstill. Thursday arrived with clear skies and extraordinary expectations. By 6 o'clock that morning, Hayes Dynamics was already alive with activity. Screens flickered across every floor. Conference rooms filled with executives, engineers, and project managers. Television crews prepared remote coverage for industry publications. Investors monitored updates from New York, Chicago, Dallas, and San Francisco. Months of planning had led to this day. The launch of the company's new artificial intelligence platform was expected to generate hundreds of millions in future contracts. Charlotte Hayes stood inside the executive briefing room overlooking the city. A wall-sized display showed real-time performance metrics. Every indicator remained green. Every department reported readiness. "Today changes everything," one executive said confidently. Charlotte nodded. She believed it. The first phase began at exactly 8 o'clock. Client systems started connecting across the country. Manufacturing partners activated integrations. Data centers absorbed increasing demand. For the first 20 minutes, everything appeared flawless. Applause broke out inside several conference rooms. Engineers exchanged relieved smiles. Charlotte finally allowed herself a deep breath. Then the first warning appeared. A small yellow notification flashed on one monitor. One engineer noticed it and frowned. That is strange. Another alert appeared seconds later. Then another. The room grew quieter. Someone checked the diagnostics dashboard. A synchronization process had begun falling behind. A supervisor ordered additional resources redirected toward the affected cluster. The issue seemed manageable. For 3 minutes, the alert slowed. Then everything accelerated. Red notifications exploded across multiple screens simultaneously. Processing queues backed up. Response times doubled, then tripled. Several client systems disconnected unexpectedly. Engineers rushed between workstations. Voices grew louder. We are losing node synchronization. Check the backup environment. Why is the recovery process failing? Give me updated numbers now. Charlotte stepped into the operations center. Her expression hardened immediately. The atmosphere had changed. Confidence had vanished. The room now buzzed with tension. Screens that had glowed green an hour earlier now flashed warning indicators. International clients began flooding support channels. Manufacturing facilities reported interruptions. Several major contracts contained performance guarantees worth tens of millions of dollars. Every minute mattered. Charlotte turned toward Victor Reynolds. What is happening? Victor's face had gone pale. We are still investigating. That is not an answer. We have never seen this behavior before. Charlotte stared at the growing list of failures. Deep inside, a cold feeling began spreading through her chest. The numbers were becoming impossible to ignore. Lost productivity, contract penalties, emergency recovery costs, investor reactions. If the situation continued, damages could exceed $100 million. By late morning, specialists from 3 different departments were working together. They examined logs. They reviewed code. They launched diagnostics. Nothing worked. Every attempted solution triggered new complications. It felt as if the system was unraveling faster than anyone could understand it. Meanwhile, Ethan Walker moved quietly through the building with his maintenance cart. He watched employees rushing through hallways. He listened to fragments of urgent conversations. He glanced occasionally toward the operations center. None of what he saw surprised him. The anomaly he had discovered days earlier was no longer hidden. It had finally awakened. Near noon, Ethan stopped beside a window overlooking the city skyline. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. For a moment, he remained completely still. Then he looked toward the operations center again. The concern in his eyes deepened, because he already knew something nobody else in the building had realized yet. The worst part of the crisis had not even begun. Here is part 6 in draft form. SUA, the operations center no longer sounded like a technology company. It sounded like a storm. Phones rang without pause. Notifications chimed from every direction. Voices overlapped as teams searched desperately for answers that refused to appear. Charlotte Hayes stood at the center of it all, her arms folded tightly as she watched another series of red warnings spread across the main display wall. Every minute brought new losses. Every failed recovery attempt made the situation worse. One executive stepped forward holding a tablet. Another manufacturing partner just suspended deployment. A second manager followed immediately. 3 more clients are requesting emergency briefings. Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment. The numbers scrolling across the financial dashboard were becoming difficult to ignore. The projected losses had already climbed beyond $80 million. If the platform remained unstable through the afternoon, the damage could easily exceed $100 million. Around her, some of the brightest engineers in the industry continued working furiously. They reviewed architecture diagrams. They compared logs. They debated theories. Yet the more they searched, the more confused they became. Nothing made sense. The failures seemed to move through the system faster than their understanding of it. Near the back of the room, Victor Reynolds rubbed his forehead. He had not slept the previous night. His confidence was gone. We are running out of options, he admitted. Quietly, the words settled heavily over the room. Nobody argued. Nobody disagreed. Because everyone knew he was right. At that same moment, Ethan Walker pushed his maintenance cart past the operations center entrance. He had spent most of the day saying nothing. watching, listening, hoping someone would identify the real cause before it was too late. But now the signs were impossible to ignore. The chain reaction had reached exactly the point he feared. Ethan stopped beside a workstation just outside the room. A system dashboard remained visible on the monitor. One glance confirmed everything. The hidden synchronization conflict was now triggering secondary failures throughout the network. He took a slow breath. Then he picked up a notepad and wrote several lines. A young analyst noticed him. "What are you doing?" Ethan handed over the page. "This is where the problem started." The analyst frowned. "You know that?" Ethan nodded. "I am fairly certain." Within minutes, the note reached Victor Reynolds. Victor looked at it once, then twice. His expression tightened. Every line described issues they had spent hours trying to understand. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "The janitor," the analyst replied. Several engineers laughed nervously. One shook his head. Another rolled his eyes. But Victor was too exhausted to dismiss anything. He carried the paper directly to Charlotte. She scanned the notes quickly. Then she stopped. The handwriting was calm, precise. The observations were specific, more specific than anything her teams had produced all afternoon. "Who wrote this?" she asked. "Ethan Walker." Silence followed. Charlotte stared toward the glass entrance. Through the crowd, she could see him standing quietly beside his cart, waiting, not demanding attention, not asking for recognition, simply waiting. For the first time all day, Charlotte felt something she had not felt since the crisis began. Not confidence, not certainty, just a small possibility. And at that moment, with the company standing on the edge of disaster, that possibility was enough. Charlotte Hayes stared at Ethan Walker for several long seconds. Around her, executives waited. Engineers watched. The operations center seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Charlotte made a decision that would have sounded impossible an hour earlier. "Bring him in," she said. A few heads turned immediately. Victor Reynolds blinked. "You mean Ethan?" "Yes." Victor hesitated. "He is a janitor." Charlotte's eyes never left the glass entrance. "Right now, he is the only person who has given me an answer that actually makes sense." The room fell silent. Minutes later, Ethan stepped into the operations center carrying neither confidence nor fear. He simply walked in the same way he walked through every hallway in the building. Calm, respectful, quiet. Hundreds of thousands of lines of code flowed across giant screens surrounding him. Engineers who once ignored him now studied him carefully. Ethan glanced at the displays and immediately saw the problem spreading through the architecture. It was worse than he expected. Charlotte approached him directly. "Can you help us?" she asked. Ethan looked toward the monitors. "I think so." Victor folded his arms. "Think so?" Ethan nodded. "I would need access to the synchronization layer and the deployment logs." Several engineers exchanged surprised looks. Those were exactly the systems at the center of the crisis. Charlotte noticed their reactions. "Give him access." Nobody moved at first. One engineer quietly objected. "We cannot hand production controls to a maintenance employee." Another nodded. The liability alone would be enormous. Ethan remained silent. He did not defend himself. He did not argue. Charlotte looked around the room. "Do any of you have a better solution?" Nobody answered. The silence spoke for itself. Within minutes, temporary credentials were issued. Ethan sat down at an empty workstation. The room watched. Fingers hovered over keyboards. Coffee cups remained untouched. Even the constant conversations seemed to fade. Ethan began reading logs. Not scanning. Reading. Carefully. Methodically. As if he already knew where to look. 5 minutes passed. Then 7. Then 10. Suddenly, Ethan opened a diagnostic file buried deep within the deployment structure. His eyes stopped. There. A hidden conflict between two synchronization protocols. Tiny. Overlooked. Harmless under normal conditions. Catastrophic under the launch traffic now flooding the system. Ethan exhaled slowly. Found it. The words were quiet. Yet every person in the room heard them. Victor stepped forward. "What is it?" Ethan rotated the monitor slightly. Several engineers crowded closer. The more they studied the data, the paler they became. He was right. Completely right. The conflict had been present for months, buried beneath layers of updates and modifications. "Can you fix it?" Charlotte asked. Ethan remained focused on the screen. "Yes." Another silence followed. This one felt different. Not panic. Not fear. Hope. For the first time since the disaster began, people were no longer searching for the problem. They were staring at the man who had found it. And as Ethan's hands moved calmly across the keyboard, Charlotte felt an unsettling realization begin forming in the back of her mind. This was not a janitor who happened to understand technology. This was someone who understood the system better than the people who built it. The room became so quiet that the faint hum of the cooling system seemed louder than the voices that had filled the operations center all day. Ethan Walker remained focused on the screen. His hands moved steadily across the keyboard, making adjustments with the calm precision of someone solving a problem he understood completely. Around him, dozens of engineers watched every command. Nobody interrupted. Nobody questioned him anymore. One by one, the warning indicators began to disappear. Red became yellow. Yellow became green. Processing queues stabilized. Response times dropped. Client connections returned. Across North America, systems that had been failing for hours suddenly came back to life. An analyst stared at his monitor and blinked twice. The manufacturing network is stable. Another voice followed. Logistics integration is back online. A third employee nearly whispered. The recovery process completed successfully. The announcements spread through the room like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Charlotte Hayes stood motionless. She watched the dashboards. Update in real time. The projected losses stopped climbing. Then they began shrinking. Millions recovered. Then tens of millions. A crisis that had threatened to damage the company beyond repair was disappearing before her eyes. Ethan typed one final command and leaned back slightly. The system completed its synchronization cycle. Every major indicator turned green. Silence followed. Not confusion. Not panic. Something different. Something deeper. For several seconds, nobody spoke. They simply stared at the screens. Then stared at Ethan. Victor Reynolds slowly lowered the tablet in his hands. "It is fixed," he said quietly. Nobody cheered. Nobody applauded. The moment felt too unbelievable for celebration. Charlotte stepped closer to Ethan's workstation. "How did you know where to look?" Ethan hesitated. "Because I recognized the conflict." Charlotte frowned. "Recognized it?" Ethan nodded. "I had seen it before." The answer raised more questions than it solved. Meanwhile, curiosity had already begun spreading through the room. Several engineers started searching internal records. They wanted to understand how a maintenance employee had solved a problem that entire departments could not identify. One young architect opened an old archive connected to the original platform development. A few seconds later, his eyes widened. "Victor," he said quietly, "you need to see this." Victor walked over. His expression changed immediately. Then another engineer looked. Then another. The discovery moved through the room in stunned silence. Charlotte noticed the reactions. "What is it?" Nobody answered at first. Finally, Victor turned his monitor toward her. An old development record filled the screen. At the top appeared the name of the lead systems architect who had designed the platform's foundational synchronization framework nearly 12 years earlier. Ethan Walker. Charlotte stared at the screen, then at Ethan, then back at the screen again. Additional records appeared. Technical patents, conference presentations, industry awards, research publications studied by engineers across the country. All carried the same name. Ethan Walker, the man who emptied trash bins, the man who polished conference tables, the man people barely noticed in the hallway. Charlotte felt her breath catch. Suddenly everything made sense. The notes, the observations, the quiet confidence, the impossible solution. Ethan had not solved someone else's system. He had repaired a system he once helped create. Across the operations center, nobody spoke. The engineers who had laughed days earlier stood frozen. The executives who had overlooked him lowered their eyes. And Charlotte Hayes finally understood why the man standing beside the maintenance cart had seemed so calm while everyone else panicked. He had never been the least qualified person in the room. He had been the most qualified all along. The next morning, Hayes' dynamics felt different. Employees who had once hurried past Ethan Walker now paused when they saw him. Some nodded respectfully. Others offered quiet greetings. A few simply watched him with the kind of curiosity reserved for someone they thought they knew, but clearly never did. Ethan accepted none of the attention differently than he accepted the silence before it. He arrived at work on time. He carried the same maintenance cart. He completed the same tasks. The only thing that had changed was how everyone else saw him. By mid-morning, Charlotte Hayes stood in her office, staring at a folder spread across her desk. It contained more than a decade of records. Awards, Patents. Industry recognition. Articles praising Ethan's contributions to advanced synchronization systems. Every page deepened the same question. Why would someone with this history choose to disappear? Later that afternoon, Charlotte finally received her answer. She drove to the small house listed in his employee file. The neighborhood was quiet. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically across green lawns. It was the kind of place people chose when they valued peace more than prestige. Charlotte knocked gently on the front door. A few moments later it opened. Not by Ethan. By Lily Walker. The young girl smiled politely. Can I help you? Charlotte smiled back. I am looking for your dad. Lily opened the door wider. Dad, someone is here. Ethan appeared from the hallway carrying a stack of folded laundry. He seemed genuinely surprised to see her. Charlotte, I hope I am not interrupting. Ethan glanced toward Lily. Not at all. Charlotte stepped inside. The house was modest but warm. Family photographs lined the walls. School artwork covered part of the refrigerator. Nothing suggested wealth or ambition. Everything suggested love. As Lily disappeared into another room, Charlotte finally asked the question she had carried all day. Why did you leave? Ethan looked toward a framed photograph resting on a bookshelf. The picture showed him standing beside a smiling woman. After my wife passed away, everything changed, he said softly. Success stopped feeling important. Charlotte remained silent. Ethan continued. Lily needed a father more than the industry needed another architect. The answer was simple, honest, complete. Charlotte felt something tighten in her chest. For years, she had measured value through growth charts, acquisitions, and quarterly reports. Sitting in that small living room, those things suddenly felt smaller. I want you to come back, she said. Not as a consultant. Not as an advisor. I want you leading our systems division. Ethan smiled gently. That is generous. You earned it. Ethan looked toward the hallway where Lily's laughter drifted softly through the house. Then he looked back at Charlotte. The greatest position I ever held is being her dad. Charlotte lowered her eyes and smiled. For the first time, she truly understood. The strongest people were not always the loudest. The wisest people were not always the most visible. And sometimes the person everyone overlooked carried more character, grace, and quiet strength than an entire room full of titles. As evening sunlight filled the house, neither of them spoke for a moment. They simply sat in comfortable silence. The kind of silence that appears when truth finally arrives and has nothing left to prove.